The smell hit her first. Diesel fuel and salt water and something metallic underneath the smell of a situation that had already gone past the point of no return. Reese Calloway stood in the belly of the SS Meridian, a rusting cargo freighter anchored 300 yards off the port of San Diego, and she did what she always did when the world narrowed down to a single sharp point. She counted. 12 men, 8 visible, 4 she could hear but not see. Victor Rodek stood 10 feet away, a man built like a Civil War monument, solid, weathered, permanent. His weapon was leveled at her chest with the casual confidence of someone who had done this before and found it unremarkable. Her own Sig Sauer was empty. Slide-locked back, chamber hollow. 16 rounds expended in the last 4 minutes and not one of them wasted. The C4 was stacked floor to ceiling behind her, enough to reshape the coastline. Reese held very still and thought about her father. Not because she was afraid. She had moved past afraid somewhere around the second deck. She thought about him because that was what she did when the math got ugly, when the variables stopped adding up, and the only remaining equation was one she could not solve with training or tactics or sheer stubborn will. She thought about Captain Owen Calloway, who had died in a desert on the other side of the world before she was old enough to form a single memory of him, and she wondered if this was what it had felt like for him in those last seconds. If he had been calm, if he had been calculating, if he had kept his eyes open. Victor said something in a language she did not speak. One of his men moved to her left. She shifted her weight onto her back foot. 72 hours ago, she had been making a latte for a woman who complained it was not hot enough. Coronado, California sits on a narrow peninsula that juts into San Diego Bay like a finger pointing at something it cannot quite reach. The Navy has owned most of it for decades. SEAL Team 3 trains there. The air smells like Pacific salt and jet fuel and ambition. It is the kind of place where extraordinary things are supposed to happen. In October of 2024, Reese Calloway was making coffee. The Anchor Coffee Shop occupied a corner storefront 3 blocks from the water. It was the kind of place that tourists found charming and locals found convenient, and Reese found quietly suffocating. She had been working there for 3 months. She had learned to make 17 different espresso drinks, to smile at people who called her sweetie, and to keep her hands visible and loose at all times, because the alternative was grabbing someone by the collar and screaming that she had spent 7 years doing things that would make their comfortable little lives collapse like wet paper. She did not do that. She made lattes. She was 27 years old, 5 feet 3 inches. Her hair was the color of old copper, the kind of red that looked burnished rather than bright, and it fell past her shoulders in waves. She did not bother to manage. Her eyes were the particular shade of green that changed with the light, darker in shadow, almost gold in direct sun. She had the lean, compact build of someone who had spent the better part of a decade doing things that required her body to be a precision instrument rather than a decoration. SEAL Team 3, 7 years. Classified missions in locations she was not permitted to name, doing things that still arrived uninvited at 3 in the morning, and sat on her chest until she forced herself upright and breathed through it. She had been good at the work. She had been, by certain objective measures, exceptional. Then came the 3rd concussion, then the 4th, then the medical review board, which was thorough and professional and devastating, and then Lieutenant Reese Calloway was retired honorably. With commendations she put in a box in storage, and she came back to Coronado because she did not know where else to go, and she made coffee because it was something her hands could do, while the rest of her tried to figure out what came next. She carried the Sig Sauer every day. She had turned in a different weapon when she separated a decommissioned trainer with a swapped serial number that nobody had flagged. The P226 that had been her sidearm for 7 years rode in a holster at her right hip inside the waistband, covered by whatever shirt she was wearing. 16 rounds. 1 chambered 15 in the magazine. She was not sure why she still carried it. She told herself it was habit. She suspected it was something closer to honesty, an acknowledgement that the part of her that had been built for violence did not stop existing just because she had signed separation paperwork. Some mornings she stood at her apartment window and watched the sun come up over the bay and thought about the fact that she was 27 years old and already finished with the only thing she had ever wanted to do. Those were the long mornings. She met Stella Pruitt at Murphy's Tavern on a Thursday evening in October. Stella was 31, a pediatric nurse at Coronado Hospital with golden hair she kept in a practical ponytail and a laugh that could reorganize the mood of an entire room. She and Reese had been friends since high school, the kind of friendship that survived years and distance and wildly divergent life choices, because at its core it was built on something real and stubborn. Stella had been trying to get Reese out of her apartment for 6 weeks. Reese had finally run out of excuses. Murphy's was a military town bar, the kind of place where the music was classic rock and the beer was cold and nobody asked you what you were thinking unless they genuinely wanted to know. There was a long wooden bar along the back wall, dark with age, and booths along the windows, and a dartboard that had been there since the Reagan administration. The light was the warm amber of a place that understood people sometimes needed to sit in a corner and not be seen. Reese slid into the booth across from Stella and positioned herself with her back against the wall. She always sat against the wall. She had stopped apologizing for it years ago. Stella pushed a beer across the table. They talked about the hospital, about a patient Stella had loved and lost that week, about the small, ordinary disasters of civilian life that Reese was still learning to take seriously. 2 hours passed. Reese felt something in her chest loosen very slightly, the way it did in those rare moments when she allowed herself to simply exist somewhere without monitoring everything around her. Then the door opened. She heard them before she saw them. The particular register of male voices operating at a volume calibrated for dominance rather than conversation. She tracked the sound automatically, her eyes moving to the entrance with the same reflexive precision she brought to everything. 5 men. Mid-30s, physically large, carrying the specific posture of men who had once been something and were still performing it. The leader was maybe 6'2", with dark hair cropped close to his skull and tattoos that climbed his forearms to his elbows. Military ink, but faded. He moved through the room like he owned the architecture. Colt Mercer, though she did not know his name yet. Did not. They commandeered the bar. Their voices rose above the music. Murphy's went slightly uneasy in the way that places do when they recognize something has entered that does not share their values. The one she would later learn was named Boone Ridley spotted them first. He was shorter than Colt, built like a concrete pillar with a shaved head and a neck tattoo that disappeared into his collar. He said something to Colt. Colt looked over. His eyes moved from Stella to Reese and stayed there. He crossed the room with the loose-limbed confidence of someone who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. His 4 companions drifted behind him in the unconscious formation of men who had learned to move as a group. "Hey there." He directed it at Stella first, then let his gaze settle on Reese. "Why don't you ladies come join us? More fun than sitting in a corner." Stella's smile was practiced and pleasant and entirely meaningless. "We're good, thanks." Colt's attention shifted to Reese. She had not smiled. She had not moved. She was looking at him the way she looked at everything, directly, without performance cataloging information. He seemed to find this interesting in a way that was not complimentary. "Come on." He leaned one hand on the edge of the table. "Don't be like that. I'm Colt. These are my boys. We appreciate the offer." Reese kept her voice flat and final. "No." Something moved across his face. Men like him heard no as a starting position rather than a destination. "You've got an attitude problem," he said. She said nothing. He reached out. Not slowly, not hesitantly. The motion of someone accustomed to taking what he reached for. Her hand came up and caught his wrist. She did not apply much force. She applied exactly enough radial nerve pressure, the kind that communicated absolute control in a language that bypassed language. His forward momentum stopped, as if he had hit a wall that only he could feel. "Don't touch me." She said it quietly. "The way you say things, you mean completely." For 2 seconds, she thought he might be smart enough to walk away. She watched the calculation happen behind his eyes. Then Boone Ridley swung a Budweiser bottle at the back of her head. She saw it in the mirror behind the bar. She was already turning when it connected, already moving, which meant the impact landed above her right temple instead of across the back of her skull. The bottle did not break. Thick glass rarely did on the first swing. It struck with a sound like a mallet on hardwood, and the world tilted, and she felt herself going sideways, and her cheek found the rough wooden floor, and everything went muffled and distant. Warm. Something warm was running down the side of her face. Male voices. Laughter at the edge of something crueler. Stella calling her name from very far away. The bartender shouting about calling the police. Reese lay still. She counted to 5. Her vision cleared. Not fully, there was a smear of light at the periphery that would later turn out to be a mild concussion, but enough. Her training did not live in her mind. It lived somewhere below thought in the architecture of her body, and no bottle to the head was going to reach it there. She assessed. 5 targets. Colt directly above her, still talking the words sliding past her without registering. Boone to her left and slightly behind. 3 others in a loose arc. The bartender at the bar. Stella in the booth. Exits at 3 o'clock and 9 o'clock. She had 47 seconds of what came next committed to memory, though not in the way you remember things you choose to record, in the way you remember things that happen to your body. She came off the floor. The first thing she did was close the distance to Boone Ridley before he could process that she was standing. Her elbow drove into his face with her full body weight behind it. Cartilage collapsed. Blood left his nose in a spray that the bar lights caught and turned briefly red gold. The bottle dropped from his hand. She kicked it away without looking at it. Colt came in fast and low, the charge of a man who trusted his mass. She sidestepped. His momentum carried him past her. Her counter came from her hip, short, compact, driven upward into the floating rib region, where there was no bone between her knuckles and his liver. The organ absorbed the impact and sent a message up his nervous system that his legs received before his brain did. He folded. His knees found the floor with a crack that silenced the nearest section of the bar. 2 down. The other 3 moved together, the instinctive grouping of men who had always found safety in numbers. The first came low, trying to drive her into the booth. She redirected his momentum with her hands on his collar, stepped aside, guided his face into the bar. He did not get up. The second grabbed for her from behind, arms locking around her waist, lifting. She made herself dead weight, drove her elbows back 3 times into his solar plexus, felt the grip loosen, executed a hip throw that had been reflexive for so many years it required no conscious thought. He went over her hip and through a table. Wood splintered. Glass detonated across the floor. The third hesitated for the half second that hesitation costs you in these situations, and then came in with a wide swing that she ducked under entirely. She drove a low kick into the side of his knee, not enough to break it, but enough. He sat down hard and stayed there. 47 seconds. She stood in the middle of Murphy's Tavern, breathing steady blood tracking down the side of her face. 5 men occupied the floor in various configurations of injury and consciousness. The bar was silent. The Eagles played softly from the speakers, which struck some detached part of her as deeply inappropriate. Then Colt moved. He had gotten to his feet somehow, one hand pressed to his side. His face had gone past anger into something older and colder. His other hand went to his belt, and she saw the K-bar 7 inches of military steel, blackened marine issue by the shape of it. "You crazy woman." His voice came out ragged. "I will end you." He lunged. She stepped inside the arc of the blade. Her left hand trapped his knife arm at the wrist. Her right drove into his elbow at an angle that joints are not designed to accommodate. Something gave. He screamed. The K-bar hit the floor. She kicked it toward the bar, pivoted behind him, and put her forearm across his carotid arteries. Rear naked choke. She had done this to men twice his size who knew exactly what was coming. He thrashed. He clawed at her forearm. His body understood before his mind did. 10 seconds. He went still. She lowered him to the floor and stepped back. Behind her, Boone Ridley was rising. She saw it in the same mirror that had saved her life 4 minutes ago. He had a bar stool raised above his head, gripped in both hands, and his face was a mask of blood and fury and the specific expression of someone who had decided that consequence no longer applied to him. She spun. The spinning back kick was one of the most powerful techniques in her entire arsenal, and she had practiced it 10,000 times on bags, on pads, on training partners wearing full protective equipment. Never on an unprotected human spine. Her heel connected with Boone Ridley's mid-thoracic region between his shoulder blades T11 and T12. She felt something give. The bar stool fell from his hands. He took 1 step forward. His legs stopped responding to the signal. He looked down at them with an expression she would carry in her memory for the rest of her life. Pure, bewildered confusion, the look of a man encountering a fundamental impossibility. "I can't." His voice was young suddenly. Young and very quiet. "I can't feel my legs." He did not fall so much as stop existing in an upright position. His legs folded beneath him, and he went down in a way that had nothing to do with gravity. and everything to do with the fact that the connection between his brain and the lower half of his body had been severed by a decision he had made 40 seconds ago when he raised a bar stool over the head of the wrong person. I can't feel my legs. Louder now. The fear in it was enormous. Reese stood in the wreckage of Murphy's Tavern and understood with the cold clarity that came after violence that she had crossed a line she could not uncross. Sergeant Dutch Malone arrived with 6 officers, and the particular energy of a man who had seen enough of the world's worst to recognize this as something different. He was 56 years old, built like someone who had once been larger, and shed what he did not need. Former Marine, 2 tours, 28 years with Coronado PD. He had the kind of command presence that made rooms quieter when he entered them. He took one look at the scene, 5 men down blood on the floor, a woman with a head wound standing at the center of it all with her hands visible and her breathing steady, and he said, "Nobody move," in a voice that nobody questioned. He came to her first. His eyes cataloged the defensive wounds on her forearms, the blood from the bottle strike the way she was standing balanced alert, not going anywhere. He told her to sit down. She sat, not because she was incapacitated, but because complicating the next hour with unnecessary resistance served nothing. He took her through the basics. Name, what happened. She gave him both. Clean sequential, no editorializing. He reviewed the security footage on the bartender's laptop. He spoke with Stella, who was pale and shaking but clear-eyed. He talked to the half-dozen witnesses who had been in the bar. Then he came back to her and held out his hand for her ID. She reached into her jacket, gave him the driver's license. Then the military identification card she carried from habit, the one she kept meaning to stop carrying because it no longer accurately described who she was. Malone took both, read the license, looked at the military ID, read it again. His expression shifted by a degree that would have been invisible to most people. She had spent 7 years learning to read the expressions of people in high-pressure situations, and she read his precisely. "Lieutenant Reese Calloway," he said it carefully. "SEAL Team 3. The bar, which had been filling back up with murmured conversation, went quiet. He looked at her. He looked at the 5 men in various states of medical crisis. He looked back at her. "Naval Special Warfare Command," she confirmed. "Honorably discharged 8 months ago." The information moved through the room in the way that significant information moves through confined spaces, quickly in pieces accumulating into something larger than any one fragment. She heard it in fragments. "She's military." "What kind?" "SEAL. Woman SEAL. Look at what she did. Look at all of them." Across the bar, Colt Mercer was being helped to sit up by an EMT. His face had the color of old concrete. He heard the word SEAL. He heard the name Calloway. She watched his expression change. Not into fear exactly, into something older than fear. Something that had been waiting a long time and had just been given a face to attach itself to. The emergency room at Coronado Hospital took 9 stitches to close the laceration above her temple. The doctor was a compact, efficient woman in her 40s who had served in the Army and recognized the type. "You're going to need 24 hours of observation," the doctor told her. "You have a mild concussion." "I'm fine." "You were struck in the head with a heavy glass bottle." "You are not fine." The doctor's voice was matter-of-fact, not unkind. "There's a difference between functional and fine. You're functional. Fine is something else." Reese let her work. Sergeant Malone arrived while the stitches were being tied off. He settled into the chair beside the bed with the weight of a man delivering news he would prefer not to deliver. "The one with the spinal injury," he said. "Boone Ridley. He's in surgery. Spinal compression fracture T11 through T12. His wife is on her way." He paused. "The prognosis isn't good, Miss Calloway. The doctors aren't saying permanent, but they aren't saying otherwise either. He attacked me with a bar stool." "I know. I've watched the footage 9 times. It's clear. Clear self-defense." He met her eyes. "But clarity doesn't make things simple. Ridley's family's going to want answers. There'll be lawyers. And Mercer's uncle is a sitting judge in San Diego County." She absorbed this. "There's more." Malone leaned forward. "The lawyer who showed up for Mercer in the last hour, Nathaniel Cross. $300 an hour minimum. Who's paying for that, I don't know. Neither do I. But somebody is. And Ridley's hospital bills, somebody's already called the hospital. Payment in full." Anonymous. Organized, she said. Yeah. Malone stood. Get some rest. This is going to be a long road. And Miss Calloway, whatever happened in that bar, whoever's behind the money, you handled yourself. But whoever they are, they're not done. He left. She sat in the quiet of the hospital room and listened to the sounds of Coronado going about its evening. Somewhere in the building, Boone Ridley was in surgery. Somewhere across town, Colt Mercer was being processed and treated and already calling whoever he called in situations like this. Her phone rang. Private number. She answered. Reese. Her grandfather's voice. The voice that had read her bedtime stories when she was 4 and talked her through the worst night of her life when she was 23 and had not changed in essential quality in all the years between. Gareth Calloway. Colonel, United States Army, retired. Green Beret. Grenada. Panama. Desert Storm. The man who had raised her after Desert Storm took her father. 76 years old and made of something that did not have a modern name. I saw the footage, he said. The whole country's seen it. It was self-defense. I know it was. I watched it frame by frame. You did exactly right. He paused. Your father would be proud. Her throat tightened. There's something else, he said. His voice shifted. The register of a man moving from grandfather to something that predated grandfathering by several decades. Colt Mercer. I know that name. How? His father. Raymond Mercer. She heard him take a breath. Dishonorable discharge 1989. Panama. Operation Just Cause. I was there. She sat up straighter despite the stitches pulling. Your father led the investigation. Gareth's voice was even and deliberate. Raymond Mercer was selling equipment, weapons, ammunition to the cartels, while we were supposed to be fighting them. Owen built the case from nothing. Testified at the court-martial. Dad was involved. He led it. Raymond Mercer went to prison for 3 years, lost his pension, lost his career. He swore revenge against the Calloway name, against your father specifically. And then Dad died. February 1991. Desert Storm. Raymond was still in prison. By the time he got out in 1992, your father was already a name on a memorial wall. Gareth let the silence sit for a moment. The revenge had nowhere to go. So he waited. Raised his son on a version of the story that made your father the villain and himself the victim. Fed that boy 3 decades of carefully constructed hatred. And now that boy is in a hospital because Captain Owen Calloway's daughter put him there on camera in front of the entire country. She understood the implication before he finished the sentence. Raymond Mercer. Gareth continued. He works for a private military company now. Steel Watch Tactical. West Coast operations. Former soldiers, bad ones, men who were forced out for reasons that don't appear in their paperwork. They take contracts legitimate outfits won't touch. You think he'll retaliate? I think you need to vary your roots. I think you need to stop establishing patterns. His voice went very quiet. And I think you should know that whatever is happening has roots that go back 30 years and involve your father's name and your grandfather's name and now your name. This is not a bar fight anymore, Reese. It may never have been. I understand. Load your weapon, keep it close. Call me the moment anything changes. She almost told him she could handle it. She had been telling him she could handle things since she was 12 years old, and she had usually been right. She did not tell him this time. She said, I understand, and she meant it differently than she usually did. She drove home through quiet streets, varying her route without thinking about it, her eyes moving to the mirrors every 45 seconds. Her apartment was on the 2nd floor of a building 3 blocks from the water. She cleared it the way she always cleared spaces, rooms first, then closets, then the bathroom, then behind the shower curtain. Empty. She put the kettle on, the kettle. She sat at the kitchen counter and looked at the door and thought about her father who had died when she was 18 months old, and whom she knew primarily through photographs and the stories her grandfather had told her over 30 years of evenings on a Montana porch. Captain Owen Calloway smiling at the camera in his dress uniform, holding a baby with copper red hair. 6 months before Desert Storm. 6 months before Highway 80 made him permanent. The kettle began to whistle. She turned to reach for it. On the counter next to the kettle, where there had been nothing when she left that morning, was a photograph. She and Stella at Murphy's Tavern. Shot through the window from the street outside, taken before anything happened, before the 5 men arrived, before the 47 seconds. The angle was precise and patient. Whoever had held the camera had known where to stand and how long to wait. Her face was circled in red marker. No note, no message, nothing that required words because the message was already complete. She stood in her kitchen with the kettle whistling and the photograph in her hand and the stitches pulling at her scalp, and understood with perfect clarity that Sergeant Malone had been right. This was not over. It was in every meaningful sense just beginning. She did not sleep. She sat at the kitchen counter until the sky outside her window shifted from black to the particular deep blue that comes just before dawn, the photograph on the counter in front of her, the Sig Sauer within reach of her right hand. She drank 3 cups of coffee she barely tasted. She thought with the cold, methodical precision that the Navy had built into her over 7 years until it became indistinguishable from instinct. Someone had been inside her apartment, not forced entry. The door lock showed no damage. The windows were intact, which meant either a key she did not know existed or a skill set that rendered locks academic. Neither possibility was comforting. Both told her the same thing: whoever Raymond Mercer had sent was not amateur. This was not intimidation by blunt instrument. This was intimidation by demonstration. We can reach you anywhere. We already have. At 6:12 in the morning, her phone rang. Stella's voice came through before Reese could speak. It was shaking in a way that Stella's voice did not shake. In 15 years of friendship, through hospital shifts and personal disasters and the ordinary catastrophes of living, Reese had heard Stella frightened maybe twice. This was different from both of those times. Harper. Her friend's old nickname for her, the one that had survived somehow from high school. There were men at my apartment. Reese was already standing. When? 20 minutes ago. 2 of them. They knocked, and when I answered, she stopped. They pushed inside. They didn't touch me. They were very careful not to touch me. But they left photographs on my kitchen table, and they said to tell you to drop the charges. They said if you keep pushing next time, won't be a conversation. What photographs? Us. At Murphy's. Close-ups of your apartment building, your car, your door. Reese, they've been watching us. They've been watching us for days. The cold in Reese's chest was not fear. She had spent enough time around fear to know its texture, and this was not it. This was the particular temperature that preceded decision, the moment when analysis ends and action begins. Pack a bag, she said. Essentials only. You have family in Oregon. My sister. Yes, but call her right now. Tell her you're coming today. Book the first flight out of San Diego. I'll cover whatever it costs. Reese, what is happening to us? Something I should have seen coming. Her voice was even. The evenness was not for her own benefit. Go, Stella. Please. Stay with your sister until I tell you it's clear. A silence. Then quietly, be careful. Always. She disconnected and stood for a moment in the early morning stillness of her apartment, the photographs still on the counter, the city still sleeping outside her window. Then she picked up her phone and called Commander Frank Osgood. He answered on the first ring, which meant he had not been sleeping either. They went after Stella, she said. He was quiet for 2 seconds. Is she hurt? Frightened. Not hurt. I'm getting her out of San Diego this morning. She stopped. This is federal now, Frank. Witness intimidation. Someone coordinating harassment across multiple locations. This isn't Raymond Mercer acting alone out of 30-year-old grievance. I know. Osgood's voice had the quality it always had before he said something she was not going to enjoy hearing. There's more, Reese. I've been sitting on it because I needed to verify it first. I should have called you last night. Tell me now. NCIS has been investigating Steelwatch Tactical for 2 years. Equipment going missing from 3 naval installations, Coronado Point, Loma, North Island. Small amounts individually, significant in aggregate. Small arms ammunition, demolition materials. The pattern is consistent and the timing aligns precisely with Raymond Mercer's work schedule on all 3 bases. They have a case. They had a case. 3 times. Twice the evidence disappeared before it could be logged. Once a witness recanted 24 hours after giving a formal statement. Osgood paused. Someone inside the system is running interference. Someone with enough access and enough authority to bury material that NCIS has already collected. She let that sit for a moment. How high? Unknown. But high enough that NCIS stopped formally investigating 8 months ago. The people who care are feeding information informally now off the books, hoping something changes the situation. He cleared his throat. What I'm telling you is that Steelwatch has been operating with protection for at least 2 years. Raymond Mercer is not just a former soldier with a grudge. He's embedded in something larger, and someone important wants him to stay embedded. She looked at the photograph on her counter. And then his son put me on camera in front of the entire country, she said, and suddenly Raymond Mercer has a problem that protection cannot quietly make disappear. Exactly. So they're doing the next best thing. Bury me in legal complications. Intimidate anyone who might testify, make me look unstable and violent in the press. If I start asking questions about my father's old cases, nobody takes me seriously. She thought for a moment. How much do you know about Ashton Vane? Osgood was quiet in a way that told her he had been expecting the question. Vane founded Steelwatch in 2009, 6 months after a dishonorable discharge from Delta Force. The circumstances of the discharge are officially classified, unofficially unauthorized operations, civilian casualties that the Army called murder, and that a legal technicality kept from becoming a prosecution. He's been running Steelwatch for 15 years. Profitable, sophisticated, completely ruthless. And Raymond Mercer runs his West Coast operations. Has for 12 years. She picked up the photograph one more time and then set it face down on the counter. He called me, she said. Vane. Last night. Offered me a job. I know. He told you to come in today? She paused. You know that already. I have people watching Steelwatch's communications. Not officially. He let that admission stand without elaborating on it. Reese. What are you thinking? She thought about her father. About a man she knew only from photographs and her grandfather's stories, who had built a case from nothing in Panama in 1989 because it was the right thing to do, and who had died before she was old enough to tell him that she understood. I'm thinking about going to that meeting, she said. That's what I was afraid of. Agent Fern Cassidy, of the FBI's Organized Crime and Counterterrorism Division, was 46 years old with dark hair going silver at the temples, and the particular brand of patience that came from spending 2 decades watching complex criminal enterprises make mistakes. She arrived at Reese's apartment at 9 in the morning with a small case and the expression of someone who had already run through the relevant risk calculations and arrived at an answer she did not entirely like. She did not waste time on preamble. I'm going to wire you, Cassidy said. Standard audio and video embedded in the pendant of a silver necklace. It's hardened against basic RF detection sweeps. Not invisible, but better than a traditional wire. She opened the case. Range is approximately half a mile under optimal conditions, less inside a warehouse structure. We'll have a receiver vehicle within 2 blocks of the facility. Reese examined the necklace. Simple design. Silver oval pendant on a fine chain. She would not have looked twice at it on someone else. Cassidy fastened it around her throat. The pendant settled just below her collarbone. It also functions as a GPS tracker, Cassidy continued. Accurate to 3 meters. We will know your position at all times, and your response time if things go wrong. Cassidy met her eyes. 8 minutes to mobilize, another 10 to the facility. She did not soften it. In a best-case scenario. 18 minutes, Reese said. Approximately. They both understood what 18 minutes meant in a confined space with trained personnel and hostile intent. Neither said it. Your mandate is evidence gathering only, Cassidy said. You go in, you listen, you get information on record, you leave. You are not a federal agent. You have no arrest authority. You do not engage, you do not provoke, you do not give them any reason to escalate. Clear crystal. I mean it, Miss Calloway. I have read your service record. The clarity of your self-defense case at Murphy's Tavern does not extend automatically to a PMC facility where you will be outnumbered by trained operators who have a significant interest in ensuring you do not leave with usable testimony. Reese looked at her steadily. I understand the parameters. Good. Cassidy closed the case. Because heroes get killed, and I'd prefer to use whatever you bring back from this meeting as evidence rather than as eulogy. Gareth Calloway arrived at the Harbor Drive parking area at noon, having driven 16 hours from his ranch in Montana without stopping for anything beyond fuel and coffee. He was 76 years old, and he moved with the deliberate economy of someone who had learned long ago not to spend energy he might need later. He pulled a duffel bag from the trunk. Inside, among other things, was a Remington 700.308 that Reese recognized from her childhood, the same rifle he had used to teach her to shoot when she was 12 out behind the ranch house with tin cans lined up on a fence rail and his voice in her ear telling her to breathe through it, not to hold the breath, to let the shot surprise her. She looked at the rifle and then at him. He said, "You're not doing this without Overwatch. I have FBI backup." 18-minute response time. His voice was dry. "I'll be in position on the crane tower at the southwest corner of the port, 700 meters to the Steel Watch entrance." His eyes met hers. "I will not interfere unless there is no other option. This is your operation. You are in command." It was the precise right thing to say. She had known him long enough to know it was not an accident. Hank Devereaux and Slade Thorne arrived 20 minutes later. Hank was 59 years old, red hair gone silver, with the hands of a man who had kept people alive in places where staying alive was not guaranteed. Former SEAL medic. He had saved Reese's life once in circumstances she did not like to recall in detail. He set up a medical kit in the back of his van with the quiet efficiency of someone who hoped he would not need it and intended to be ready regardless. Slade Thorne was 62, built lean and angular with pale blue eyes that missed nothing. Former SEAL intelligence specialist. He had his laptop open before he finished sitting down. "I've accessed Steel Watch's security camera system through their monitoring contractor," he said without looking up. 42 cameras. I have eyes on all of them." He pulled a flesh-colored earpiece from his jacket pocket and held it out to Reese. "You'll hear me, but they won't see you respond if you're careful about it." She put it in. He continued. "As of 30 minutes ago, 16 personnel inside the facility, 6 armed security on rotation, 10 administrative and operational staff. Raymond Mercer is in the building. Vane arrived at 0800 and has not left." She absorbed this. Osgood settled into the chair across from Gareth. The two men regarded each other, the former Green Beret colonel and the former SEAL commander, two generations of men who had operated in the dark places that kept the country safe and received very little of what they had been promised in return. They nodded to each other. It was enough. At 1347, Reese walked across the parking lot toward Steel Watch Tactical's Harbor Drive facility. She had positioned Gareth in the crane tower before she left. She had confirmed Hank's medical station behind the container stack on the southwest corner. She had verified Slade's camera access and established communication protocols. Every decision in the next hour would be hers, but she had placed her people where she needed them, and they would hold their positions until she told them otherwise. The building was a converted warehouse, single-story, approximately 15,000 square feet, with cameras at every corner and armed guards at the main entrance. The guards were professional. She could tell by the way they stood. They scanned her at the door. Metal detector physical search. The female security officer found the Sig Sauer at her right hip and secured it in a lockbox without comment. The necklace passed inspection. She was led through corridors that smelled like gun oil and controlled aggression, past a shooting range, past offices where men in tactical gear studied topographic maps with the focused attention of people planning things rather than remembering them. Slade's voice in her ear very quiet. "You're on camera 7, then 8. I've got you." Raymond Mercer just moved from the ground floor to the second level. "He knows you're in the building." She climbed the stairs. The conference room was large and deliberately impressive, mahogany table, leather chairs, windows that looked down onto the warehouse floor where she could see crates being inventoried with systematic precision. Ashton Vane stood when she entered. He was 6'2", lean and gray at the temples, with the kind of stillness that came from being dangerous for a very long time. His eyes moved over her with the assessment of someone evaluating a weapon system rather than a person. "Miss Calloway, thank you for coming. Please sit." She sat, kept her hands visible, maintained eye contact. Standing behind Vane, positioned slightly to the left, was Raymond Mercer. 52 years old, harder than his son, carrying his military bearing the way a man carries a thing he has owned so long he has forgotten it is separate from him. His eyes locked onto her with something that had been waiting 30 years for a face to land on. She held his gaze for exactly 2 seconds, then returned her attention to Vane. "Let me be direct," Vane said. He settled into his chair and folded his hands on the table. What happened with Colt at Murphy's Tavern was not sanctioned by this organization. His judgment has always been compromised by his father's history and by anger he was never taught to manage. That is Raymond's failure and mine for not addressing it sooner. Raymond's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. He attacked me with a bottle, Reese said. His associate may never walk again. Vane nodded. Serious consequences for serious failures. I understand. But I did not bring you here to relitigate Thursday night. I brought you here because your service record is exceptional and Steelwatch can offer you something that making coffee in Coronado cannot. $300,000 a year, among other things. He named the figure without ceremony. Full benefits international contracts work that would actually use what the Navy spent 7 years building in you. He paused. You're too good to be wasted. I suspect you know that. The answer is no. You haven't heard the answer is no. She kept her voice level. I know what Steelwatch is. I know what the contracts are that legitimate outfits won't take. I know that Raymond Mercer has been walking out of 3 naval installations with equipment that doesn't belong to him for 2 years, and I know that someone inside the system has been making sure nobody looks too closely at the paperwork. The room went very quiet. Vane studied her. Raymond had gone absolutely still behind him. Then Vane smiled. It did not reach his eyes. You're wired. He said it the way you state an observable fact without accusation, without particular alarm. He looked directly at the pendant at her throat and then back up at her face. Yes, she said. Bold. He seemed genuinely to appreciate it. I respect that. He leaned forward slightly. The problem with a wire, Miss Calloway, is that it only matters if you leave this building able to testify. 4 contractors entered the room, all armed, all moving with the coordinated purpose of people who had rehearsed this. Reese did not move. FBI knows I'm here. She kept her voice even. Anything happens to me, this facility becomes the most investigated building in California. Perhaps. He tilted his head. But that won't help you in the next several minutes, will it? The building shook. Not violently, a distant concussive pressure that arrived through the floor and the walls simultaneously, the physical signature of something very large detonating several miles away. The windows vibrated in their frames. Every phone in the room lit up at once. Vane grabbed his. Answered. His face, which had maintained its controlled composure through everything, went the color of old paper. He lowered the phone. Naval Base Coronado, he said very quietly. Multiple explosions. Weapons depot. Reports of casualties. Slade's voice in Reese's ear, urgent and low. Reese, the base is under attack. Massive detonations on the north end. Get out of there. Vane looked at her. His calculation was happening in real time and she could watch it moving behind his eyes. Did your people do this? No. He believed her. She could see it. And she could see something else in his expression that she had not expected, something that looked beneath the controlled surface of a man accustomed to violence, like genuine fear. His phone erupted again. He answered, listened, set it down with the careful deliberateness of a man managing his own reaction. Colt, he said. Colt Mercer has not reported in. He was scheduled here this morning. He turned to Raymond. Where is your son? Raymond Mercer stood very still, and in his stillness Reese read something that she filed away carefully. He was not surprised. He was calculating. She looked at Vane. Run your inventory, she said. Right now. Full audit of everything in storage. He looked at her. Run it now. He spoke to one of the contractors. The man left at speed. Slade's voice in her ear. I've got Colt Mercer on comms intercept. He's at the port. He's directing a loading operation onto a vessel. SS Meridian. Scheduled departure 1700 hours. She kept her face neutral. Raymond said nothing. The contractor came back in 3 minutes. He stopped in the doorway. The expression on his face was the expression of someone delivering news that will change everything. Half the pre-positioned inventory is gone, he said. C4, det cord blasting caps, small arms ammunition. His voice was steady with visible effort. Someone with access codes cleared it out last night. Vane's fist hit the mahogany table. Raymond Mercer looked at his hands. And Reese understood in the sudden clarity of it the full shape of what she was looking at. Not Raymond acting out of 30-year-old grievance. not Colt acting out of inherited hatred, something far more deliberate and far more dangerous, a man who had been running two operations simultaneously and who had just used one to cover the other, and whose son was at this moment loading stolen military explosives onto a cargo ship that would leave American waters in 3 hours and 17 minutes. She looked at Vane. His West Coast operation, she said, nodding at Raymond. He's been running a parallel arrangement for years. Your resources, his contacts. And your organization has been providing the cover, the security clearances, the base access, the paper trail that made it all look legitimate. Vane looked at Raymond Mercer. The look between them was the end of something that had lasted 12 years. Raymond held his gaze for a moment. Then he looked away. Slade's voice. Reese, the ship departs in 3 hours. If that cargo leaves U.S. waters, she was already moving. She turned to Vane. I need my weapon back. And I need to know if any of your people are worth a damn in a real situation. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, give her the weapon to the contractor nearest the door. She was handed the Sig Sauer. She checked the chamber, out of habit, holstered it. She turned to Raymond Mercer. You're going to answer for all of it. Panama, the installations, every piece of equipment that left those bases. She held his gaze. And your son is going to answer too, but he's going to do it in a courtroom not at the bottom of San Diego Bay. Raymond said nothing. His face was a controlled mask over something she could not fully read. She looked at Vane. I need 4 of your best operators. People who can follow orders and won't make decisions I haven't authorized. This is my operation. Clearvein studied her for 3 seconds. Former Delta, former SEALs, former Rangers. He stood. I'll give you 6. She spoke into the air, knowing Slade would hear her through the earpiece. Slade, coordinate with Hank. Get Osgood on the line. Tell the colonel to move to the port. She paused. And tell Agent Cassidy that the situation has changed. In her ear, Slade's quiet voice. Copy. What do I tell her about your status? Tell her I'm going to the port. Tell her the ship cannot leave. She's going to tell you to stand down. I know. Reese walked toward the door. Tell her anyway. She walked out of the conference room and down the stairs and out through the front entrance of Steelwatch Tactical into the afternoon sun, and behind her she could hear Vane already issuing orders to his operators, and in her ear she could hear Slade pulling manifests and Hank confirming his medical position, and somewhere 700 meters away she knew her grandfather was already breaking down his rifle and moving. She had told Cassidy she understood the parameters. She had meant it at the time. The parameters had changed. 16 sailors were dead. More were wounded. Colt Mercer was on a ship at the port of San Diego with enough stolen military explosive to devastate a coastline, loading it for transport to people who would use it in ways that would echo for decades. She got into the vehicle. She thought about her father, who had built a case from nothing in Panama because it was the right thing to do. She drove toward the port. The port of San Diego in the late afternoon had the quality of a place that did not know yet what it was about to become. Container stacks rose 40 feet on either side of the access road, painted in the faded colors of shipping companies from a dozen countries. Forklifts moved between them with the patient industry of machines that had no opinion about what they carried. Gulls rode the thermal currents above the water. The sun was dropping toward the Pacific and painting everything in amber and shadow, the kind of light that made ordinary things look significant. Pier 7 was at the far end of the northern complex. The SS Meridian sat in her berth like something that had been waiting there a long time. Rust-streaked hull. Liberian flag hanging limp in the still air, 300 feet of aging freighter that had moved questionable cargo between questionable ports for years without attracting the kind of attention that ended operations. She was attracting it now. Reese rolled the vehicle to a stop behind a container stack 200 yards from the gangway and stepped out into the salt air. Slade's voice came through the earpiece immediately. 14 heat signatures on deck, armed professional dispersal pattern. They know someone is coming, they just don't know from where yet. He paused. Colt Mercer is amidships near the main cargo hatch. He's directing the last of the loading. Based on the rate, they'll be finished in 40 minutes. Departure is at 1700, which gives you less than 90 minutes total. Yeah. Gareth's voice steady and unhurried. I'm in position. Crane tower, southwest corner. I have clean sight lines to the deck and the gangway. 708 meters. He paused. Go ahead and take a breath, Ghost, she breathed. Hank Devereaux confirmed his medical station trauma kit. Blood IV supplies positioned behind the container stack on the port side where he could reach any point on the pier in under 3 minutes. He did not say good luck. He never said good luck. He said, I'll be here, which meant the same thing and was more useful. Vane's 6 operators had staged in 2 vehicles 50 yards back. Former special operations, all of them, she had run them through a rapid assessment during the drive and confirmed what Vane had promised. Professional, disciplined, capable of following orders they had not originated. She had given them their assignments with the economy of someone who did not repeat herself. Agent Cassidy's voice came through on a separate channel. Miss Calloway, I am formally ordering you to hold your position and wait for FBI hostage rescue team. ETA is currently... Slade, she said quietly. Switch me to TAC channel. Copy. Switching. Cassidy's voice disappeared. She did not feel good about that. She understood Cassidy's position completely. The FBI had authority. Here had jurisdiction, had the legal and institutional weight to handle this correctly. In a world where time was not the variable it currently was, standing down and waiting was the right answer. 16 sailors were dead. The ship left in 87 minutes. She moved, container to container, staying low, using the long shadows the setting sun threw westward across the pier. Her eyes moved continuously, sight lines, sight angles, the position of each guard she had cataloged from Slade's thermal data. 2 at the gangway, 3 on the forward deck, 2 more near the cargo hatch. The rest below or inside. She covered the first 100 yards without being seen. At 50 yards from the gangway she stopped. The nearest sentry had his back to her, watching the water. The second was turned 45 degrees, scanning the container yard with the systematic sweep of someone following a pattern. She timed the pattern. 12 seconds between the point where he faced away and the point where he would see her position. 12 seconds was more than she needed. She moved on the count, closed the distance to the first guard in 8 steps. Her hand came over his mouth from behind. The other arm locked around his throat, forearm against carotid. He struggled for 6 seconds, trained response, trying to tuck his chin, trying to create space. She had accounted for this. He went limp at 9 seconds. She lowered him to the dock, zip-tied his wrist, took his radio, moved to the second guard before the pattern brought him back around. 8 seconds for the second. She was on the gangway before either of them was missed. The deck of the SS Meridian smelled like rust and diesel, and the particular organic decay of old ships, the accumulated residue of years of cargo holds and salt water in human use. She moved along the starboard rail in a low crouch, using the ventilation housings and equipment lockers for cover. Below her, through the gaps in the deck plating, she could hear the metallic rhythm of crates being moved. Slade's voice. You're clear on the forward deck. 2 sentries near the bridge, both facing forward. Razor team is approaching the port gangway on my mark. She had given the lead steel watch operator, former Delta call sign Razor, his instructions during the drive. Secure the bridge. Lock down the navigation systems. Prevent departure. Do not enter the cargo hold under any circumstances. The cargo hold was hers. She found the main hatch amidships, crouched beside it, listened. Voices below English and something else clipped and urgent. She identified at least 4 distinct speakers. She could hear the mechanical sound of loading equipment, the hollow resonance of crates being stacked in a confined space. Slade. What am I looking at below the hatch? Thermal shows 9 signatures in the cargo hold. 5 are stationary near the aft bulkhead loading crew. 2 are moving supervisory pattern. 1 is positioned near the forward access. 1 is at the center of the space. That last one is Colt Mercer. He's been stationary for the last 6 minutes. And the cargo. Based on the manifest and what cleared out of Steel Watch storage, best estimate is 400 pounds of C4 associated det cord and initiators, approximately 300 small arms, and enough ammunition to supply a sustained engagement. He paused. If any of that goes up in the hold, I know. She dropped through the hatch. She landed in a combat crouch, Sig Sauer up, both eyes open, scanning in the half-second before anyone processed that she had arrived. The cargo hold was enormous and claustrophobic, simultaneously the ceiling low, the walls pressing in every surface, stacked with crates that bore the stenciled markings of military logistics. The lighting was harsh and industrial. It smelled like metal and chemicals, and the specific combination that her training had long ago flagged as explosive materials in proximity. Federal agent, hands where I can see them. She was not federal anything. But they did not know that, and the 2 seconds of hesitation it bought her were 2 seconds she used to assess and reposition. 9 men. 5 near the aft bulkhead, 2 moving, 1 near the forward access, and Colt Mercer at the center of the hold, standing beside the last pallet of crates, an M4 carbine hanging from a single-point sling across his chest. He looked different from Murphy's Tavern. The loose aggression was gone. What remained was harder and quieter and in some ways worse. He wore tactical gear. He held the M4 with the ease of someone for whom it was a native language. This was who he actually was. Thursday night had been theater. This was the performance it had been covering. The next 40 seconds were not theater. She engaged the nearest threat before his weapon came fully up. 2 rounds controlled the second, catching him as he turned. His body armor absorbed 1. He dropped. The second man was faster. She moved before his burst reached her, felt the rounds spark off the deck behind her. Heels came up from behind a crate and put him down with 1 shot to the leg. Not lethal. She needed as many of them alive and talking as possible. From the hatch above, Razor's team opened suppressing fire into the deck, buying her seconds. It would not last. They had their own situation to manage on the bridge. Colt was gone from the center of the hold. She swept the space. He had moved toward the aft access, the passage that led to the engine room. She saw the hatch swinging shut as she rounded the last stack of crates. She followed. The engine room of the SS Meridian was a different kind of confined space. Not the cold industrial geometry of the cargo hold, but something hotter and more intimate, all pipes and machinery, and the low throb of diesel engines at idle. The vibration came through the deck plates and up through her boots. The smell was fuel and heat. She came through the hatch in a low roll and came up with the SIG leveled. Colt Mercer stood on the far side of the engine room with his M4 raised. They looked at each other across 15 feet of machinery and noise. "Drop it," she said. His jaw was set. His hands were steady. Whatever he was feeling, he had locked it somewhere that did not interfere with his grip. "You Callaways." His voice was tight. "You cannot leave anything alone. Put it down, Colt. My father lost everything because of yours. Everything. His career, his pension, his name. He raised me on stories about what your family did to ours. He held the M4 level. I grew up knowing one thing for certain, that the Callaway name meant the end of everything good." She kept her weapon up. Her voice was even. "I know what he told you. Then you know why I'm here." "I know what he told you," she said again. "And I know it wasn't true." She let that land. "Your father sold weapons to cartel soldiers in Panama while American servicemen were dying in the same country. My father built the case against him from nothing because it was the right thing to do. That's the story. That's all of it." She paused. "Everything else Raymond told you, every version where he was the victim and my father was the villain, that was a man protecting himself by giving his son someone else to hate." His grip tightened. "You don't know. Victor Rodek told you your father has been working with his organization since 2009. She watched his face. She had been watching it since she came through the hatch, and she had seen what she expected to see, not the cold certainty of a true believer, but the barely contained fracturing of someone whose foundation had been giving way for some time. You didn't know that. When he told you something broke. Because if your father has been running his own operation for 15 years, then the revenge was never about honor. It was never about family. It was about resources and access and money, and you were the instrument he built over 35 years because instruments are useful." Colt said nothing. The M4 was still up, but his breathing had changed. "He used your hatred," she said. "He aimed you. And when this falls apart, when the FBI takes this ship apart and finds everything on it, he is going to let you absorb every consequence while he calculates his next move. That is who Raymond Mercer is. That is who he has always been. My father knew it in 1989, and it cost Raymond everything, and he has spent 35 years making sure it cost your family everything too." The silence between them had the quality of something about to break. He fired. She was already moving, not because she had predicted the exact moment, but because she had been reading the incremental signals for 30 seconds, and her body had been preparing without being told to. The burst went past her left shoulder close enough that she felt the pressure of displaced air. She closed the distance in 3 steps. Inside his guard, inside the effective range of the M4. Her left hand redirected the barrel upward. Her right drove into his weapon arm at the elbow, not the hyperextension she had used on Thursday night, something more controlled enough to compromise his grip without ending the conversation she needed him conscious for. Her foot swept his lead leg. He went down. She had the M4 off him in the same motion, cleared the chamber, set it against the far bulkhead. He was on his back, breathing hard, already reaching for the sidearm at his hip. She put her knee on his wrist and took the sidearm and set it beside the rifle. 2 rounds, she said. Right thigh, left shoulder. She had fired them in the last second of the exchange, precise and deliberate. You're going to bleed, but you're not going to die. She pulled the trauma kit from her vest. Hank had pressed it on her before she boarded, and she had been annoyed at the time and was not annoyed now. Stay still. She applied pressure to the thigh wound first, which was worse. He hissed through his teeth. Why? His voice was stripped of everything except the question. Why keep me alive? Why not just... Because you're going to testify. She kept her hands working efficient. No wasted motion. You're going to tell a federal court everything, your father's operation, Steel Watch, the installations, all of it. You're the only person in this chain who was lied to rather than complicit. That matters. It won't save you from consequences, but it matters. He looked at the ceiling of the engine room. His face was doing something complicated. I believed him, he said. 35 years. Every word. I know. That's... He stopped. That's the worst part. Not this. Not any of this. That I believed him. She tied off the pressure bandage. She did not tell him it would be all right because she did not know if it would be, and he deserved better than comfortable lies. She had heard enough of those for one lifetime. Footsteps on the ladder behind her, multiple sets moving fast. She turned. Victor Rodek came through the lower hatch with 2 men flanking him. He was exactly as she had imagined him from Slade's descriptions, large, deliberate, carrying his danger, the way old mountains carried their age as something geological rather than personal. His weapon was a compact submachine gun, and it was pointed at her chest with the patient accuracy of a man who had done this at very close range before and found the experience unremarkable. Step away from him. She did not move. He is a liability now, Victor said. His English was precise, accented with the clipped consonants of Eastern European military training. Whatever he has told you, whatever he knows, none of it leaves this ship. His 2 men moved to flank her. She assessed. Sig Sauer in her hand, 6 rounds remaining. 2 threats at 7 o'clock and 5 o'clock. Victor at 12:10 feet, Colt on the deck behind her, wounded but conscious. Engine room geography pipes and machinery creating partial cover at 3 locations. 6 rounds. 3 targets. Confined space. Then Victor said, Your father killed 17 of my colleagues. A man does not forget a debt like that. He tilted his head. I have been patient. My father, she said, was defending liberated territory against people who were murdering civilians. Victor smiled. Every soldier believes that. From the aft access, the secondary hatch that she had noted when she first entered, the one that Hank's schematic had shown connecting to the exterior emergency ladder on the ship's port side, there was a sound. Metal on metal. Deliberate. Victor's eyes moved to it. 1 second. The fraction of a second that represented the difference between a man who was completely in control of a situation and a man who had just encountered a variable he had not accounted for. Reese moved. She had chosen her cover point 14 seconds earlier, and her body had been oriented toward it since. She drove left behind the main fuel conduit, 18 inches of steel pipe that would stop anything Victor's weapon was firing, and came up in a kneeling position with the SIG leveled at the closer of the 2 flanking men. 2 rounds. He went down. The second flanking man swung toward her. From the aft hatch, a single-shot precise controlled the signature report of a .308 rifle in a confined space, enormously loud and exactly placed. The man's weapon arm dropped. He did not drop with it, but he was done as a threat. Gareth Calloway came through the aft hatch with the Remington in a tactical carry and his 76-year-old body moving with the unhurried certainty of someone who had made the relevant decisions before he came through the door. He did not take Victor. He positioned himself at the hatch covering the room, and he looked at Reese and gave her a single nod. She was already moving. Victor had turned toward Gareth in the second that the shot came through the hatch, the instinctive pivot toward the new threat, and that pivot had cost him the half-second he could not buy back. Reese came in from his left side inside the weapon, her left hand driving his gun arm up and across his body. The submachine gun discharged into the ceiling. Her right elbow drove into his jaw with the full rotation of her hips behind it. He staggered. She followed, no pause, no reset, wrist lock weapon stripped, thrown to the far bulkhead. Her arm went across his throat from behind. He was larger than she was by 60 pounds, and he knew what she was doing, and he had the training to counter it, and none of it was enough. She had done this to men larger and better trained in places that did not appear on any map, and she held the position with the absolute stillness of someone who had decided how this ended before it started. Victor struggled for 11 seconds. Then he stopped. She held for 3 seconds past the limpness confirming, then lowered him to the deck and stepped back. The engine room was silent except for the idle throb of the diesel engines and Colt's breathing from the deck and the distant sounds of Razor's team completing their work on the bridge above them. Gareth looked at her. He did not say anything for a moment. "You all right?" "Yes." He nodded. "Good, that was all. It was sufficient." The FBI hostage rescue team arrived 11 minutes later. They came aboard in full tactical configuration and found a secured ship, a disabled navigation system. 9 men detained at various points between the cargo hold and the deck. Victor Rodek zip-tied in the engine room with a dislocated jaw, and Reese Calloway sitting on the deck beside Colt Mercer, keeping pressure on his thigh wound, waiting. Agent Cassidy descended the ladder into the engine room and looked at the scene for a long moment. "You are in considerable trouble," she said. The ship didn't leave. Cassidy looked at Victor Radek, looked at the 2 men Gareth had put down, looked at Reese. "You and I are going to have a very long conversation," she said. "I'll make myself available." Outside on the pier, the full picture was assembling itself with the methodical inevitability of justice arriving at its own pace. Raymond Mercer was in federal custody, arrested the moment Cassidy's team had moved on the facility based on the wire recording from Reese's meeting with Vane, which had captured enough to constitute probable cause 3 times over. He was standing at the rear of an FBI vehicle in handcuffs when the ambulance carrying Colt came down the gangway. Raymond pulled toward his son. 2 agents held him. "Colt." His voice broke on the single syllable. "Son, I did what I did for family. For us. You have to understand that." Colt turned his head away. The ambulance doors closed. He did not look at his father again. What Colt would provide in the weeks that followed in a formal cooperation agreement with the United States Attorney's Office was the complete architecture of an operation that Raymond Mercer had been running for 15 years. The names of Victor Rodek's associates across 4 states, the financial structures through which stolen military equipment had been moving, the specific mechanism by which evidence had been disappearing from NCIS investigations, a mid-level logistics officer at Naval Base Coronado, now also in custody, who had been on Raymond's payroll since 2011. 17 arrests followed. The cases were federal prosecuted with the particular thoroughness that attaches to matters involving national security, and the sentences reflected that thoroughness. Raymond Mercer was charged with treason, arms trafficking conspiracy, and 6 counts related to the attack on the naval base. He was 62 years old at the time of his sentencing. He would not leave federal custody. Ashton Vane cooperated fully with the FBI in exchange for considerations that kept him out of a cell but ended Steelwatch Tactical permanently. The company's assets were seized. Its contracts were terminated. The 3 naval installations where it had operated were audited with a thoroughness that had not been applied during the years of Raymond Mercer's access. Judge Howard Mercer announced his retirement from the San Diego County Superior Court before the week was out. An ethics investigation followed. The outcome of that investigation, conducted over many months, was not kind. Boone Ridley, from a rehabilitation facility in San Diego, where he was learning to navigate the permanent geography of life in a wheelchair, issued a statement through his attorney declining to pursue civil litigation against Reese Calloway. The statement was brief and unadorned. He had attacked her with a deadly weapon. She had defended herself. He accepted the consequences of his choices. There was nothing further to say. Victor Rodek was transferred to federal custody, and then to a facility whose location was not part of the public record. He would not be tried in civilian court. She drove to Montana. Not immediately. There were depositions, debriefs, Formal statements given across 3 separate federal agencies over the course of 10 days that felt longer than any deployment she had ever served. Agent Cassidy was thorough and fair and made clear that while Reese's actions at the port had produced results that nobody in the FBI was going to pretend were unwelcome, the question of authorization and jurisdiction and the precise boundaries of civilian legal engagement would be examined with care. The examination produced no charges. It produced a formal letter of commendation from the FBI director and a Navy League Distinguished Service Medal presented in a ceremony that was not open to the press. Reese accepted both and felt neither. 16 sailors, 43 wounded, families that had been complete on a Thursday morning and were not complete on Friday. No medal addressed that arithmetic. She understood this and did not expect it to. She drove to Montana on a Tuesday in November. The sky, the particular hard blue of high elevation in early winter, the mountains visible from 100 miles out and growing incrementally larger with each passing hour. Gareth met her at the airport in Billings. He had driven down from the ranch 2 hours each way without being asked. He pulled her into a hug that lasted longer than either of them counted. They drove to the ranch mostly in silence. The road climbed through pine forests and open meadows where the first real snow of the season had laid a thin white surface over everything, the kind of snow that made the world look both new and ancient. The ranch house came into view around a bend in the road, weathered wood and stone, a porch that faced west toward a range of peaks that turned colors at sunset that did not have names in ordinary language. She had been here 100 times. It had never looked the way it looked that evening. They sat on the porch after dinner with coffee, watching the sun go down behind the mountains, and Gareth let the silence be what it needed to be for a while before he spoke. "Your father sat in that chair," he said. He nodded at the chair she was sitting in. "The night before he shipped out for Desert Storm. He had 3 days of emergency leave. He came home to see you. You were 18 months old. He sat right there until 2 in the morning. She looked at the chair. "He called me out here," Gareth continued. "We sat the way we're sitting now. He told me he was afraid. Not of dying. He had made a certain peace with the possibility of dying. He was afraid he was not good enough, that he would fail the people who depended on him." He paused. "That he had left things unfinished that deserved to be finished." "What did you tell him?" "I told him that every good soldier I had ever known was afraid of exactly that. That it was the fear that made them good, the understanding that failure had real cost, that the people depending on you were real, that nothing was abstract when it went wrong. I told him that courage was not the absence of that fear. Courage was doing the work anyway, because the alternative was living with having chosen not to." She was quiet for a moment. "Did it help?" He smiled. He said it didn't. He went anyway. She looked at the mountains. The last of the sun was leaving the highest peaks, the light going from gold to rose to the deep blue that preceded dark. "I keep thinking about what I could have done differently," she said. "To get there sooner. To know sooner. Those 16. Gareth was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Your father asked me the same thing about Panama. About the men who died while he was building his case against Raymond Mercer. Wondering if faster, smarter, different would have saved them." "What did you tell him?" "I told him that the dead do not want to be used as a measure of our failure. They want to be remembered as the cost of something worth doing." He looked at her. "Raymond Mercer was stopped. Victor Roddick is in federal custody. 17 people who would have continued to do harm are not doing harm. Colt Mercer is going to spend years in a courtroom providing the testimony that makes all of it permanent. That is what you built. That is what Owen's daughter built. He let that sit. He would not have wanted you to carry those 16 as guilt. He would have wanted you to carry them as purpose." She felt the tears come and did not stop them. Not the way she usually stopped them. The reflexive redirection, the controlled management of emotion that 7 years of SEAL training had made nearly automatic. She let them come because she was on her grandfather's porch in Montana, and the mountains were doing what mountains did in the last light of the day. And she was 27 years old, and she had been carrying things alone for longer than was necessary. Gareth put his hand on her shoulder and left it there. They sat until the stars came out. In Montana, the stars were not the diminished, scattered things they were in coastal cities. They were the original version, dense and layered and so numerous that the spaces between them seemed incidental. She had forgotten what they looked like. She had forgotten a lot of things that turned out to still be there. I've been thinking about what comes next, she said eventually. Tell me. There are women coming out of the service every year who have no idea what to do with themselves. No framework, no community, no one who has been where they've been and come through it and can show them the shape of what's possible on the other side. She paused. I spent 3 months making coffee and feeling like I was disappearing. I don't want anyone else to have those 3 months without knowing that someone understands. A training facility, Gareth said. Transition support, skills counseling, community connection to opportunities. Something real. Something that actually uses what we know. He was quiet for a moment. Where? Colorado. Mountains like this. Room to breathe. He nodded slowly. I'll help. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. He looked at her. You're my granddaughter. There is nothing I wouldn't do. Besides, he added, someone needs to make sure you don't conduct any more unauthorized tactical operations on cargo ships. That was one time. It had better stay one time. He said it with the tone of a man who knew it would not stay one time and had decided to love her anyway. My heart is 76 years old. She laughed. The sound of it surprised her, genuine, unmanaged rising out of something that had loosened in her chest somewhere between the tears and the stars. Gareth laughed too, quietly, the way he did everything. They stayed on the porch until the cold drove them inside. And even then, Reese stayed a moment longer, looking at the chair her father had sat in on. The last night he was home, and she thought that she understood him now, in a way she had not understood him before. Not the photograph, not the name on the memorial, but the man who had been afraid and gone anyway, who had built something worth building in the limited time he had, who had passed it forward in the only way that mattered. She went inside. 6 months later, Vanguard Transition opened its doors in the mountains outside Colorado Springs. Gareth drove down from Montana for the opening. He stood in the back of the room while Reese addressed the first cohort. 12 women, different branches, different years of service, different wounds, both visible and otherwise. He did not say anything. He did not need to. She could see him in her peripheral vision, steady and quiet the way he had always been. The first woman through the full program was a former Army sergeant named Taylor Marsh. 3 tours in Afghanistan. Came home to find that civilian life was a language she did not speak. She had been working retail, going through the motions, feeling the distance between who she had been and who the world expected her to be, now widen every day into something she could not see across. I thought I was broken, Taylor told her in their first real session. I thought there was something wrong with me. Everyone else seemed to know how to do this, how to just be a person, and I couldn't figure it out. There's nothing wrong with you, Reese said. You were built for something specific and then asked to be something general without any help making the transition. That's not a defect. That's a situation. Situations can be changed. Taylor stayed 6 weeks. She worked through things she had been carrying since Kandahar. She connected with women who had stood in similar places and found their way to different ground. She left with a position at a security consulting firm in Denver and something more valuable than a job, a working theory of who she was going to be next. On her last day, she stood in the doorway of Reese's office and said, "You saved my life." "You saved your own life," Reese told her. "I just gave you somewhere to stand while you figured out how." Taylor nodded. Then she left. Reese stood at the window and watched her walk to her car across the parking lot, mountains rising behind her, the sky the hard, clear blue of a Colorado morning. She thought about her father, about Gareth on the porch, about the chair, about what it meant to pass something forward when you did not know who would receive it or what they would make of it. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Female voice, young, somewhere between controlled and barely controlled, the specific register of someone who had decided to make one call before deciding anything else. I was told, the voice said, that this is the place to call if you're having trouble. After. Reese moved to her desk, picked up a pen. "You called the right place," she said. "Tell me your name."